Hello again. The place I'm trying to get to by the end of this overall section is a position where it makes sense to ask questions like, what is knowing? And there are a number of conditions that have to be in place before that kind of question can be asked. This isn't the kind of question you can direct at a rock. To ask whether a rock knows anything stretches the definition of knowing beyond viability, in my opinion. Nor is it the kind of question which can be applied meaningfully to an ant, or an amoeba, or a trilobite. Knowing, I would say, cannot even be attributed to Fred and Wilma Flintstone that I've spoken about before, or our distant three-dimensional ancestors. As I'll be arguing later, when we talk about this thing we call knowing, as if it was capable of existing outside of the narrowly circumscribed domain of the bodies of Homo sapiens, I think we're indulging in anthropomorphism, applying human attributes to non-human entities. To possess knowledge, or to engage in knowing, requires a very particular conceptual apparatus, which seems to be uniquely associated with the tottering, chattering bipeds that wandered out of Africa and colonized the earth around 50,000 years ago. And what goes for knowledge also goes for all of the other architectural elements of thinking that make human life so interesting: believing, hoping, desiring, wishing, dreading, doubting. But if I want to talk about these things, I think I have to start with rocks, or at least the metabolizing chemical goop that gathered on the backs of rocks at the start of it all. The causal narrative that I'll be tracing leads from the simplest of organisms to Lucy, to you and I, speaking and listening, reading and writing. And of course, if it's not immediately obvious, I am reading at the moment. I had some time earlier on today, so I did write some of this stuff out. But I'll have to come off the screen in a bit because I haven't written everything I want to talk about. Anyhow, to return to the written narrative. If I can approach this narrative, this is the narrative of evolutionary history, which leads to something we might call a knowing being, something like ourselves. If I can reacquaint ourselves with that narrative, and if I can approach that narrative by playing the tape backwards, we might hear, amongst the satanic messages always found in masked audio, the sound of thought leaving the building, accompanied by the trailing off of a disappearing mind. By this I mean that what we call thinking requires the existence of something called mind, in inverted commas, which in turn requires the existence of a brain capable not only of carrying out the usual functions of managing the body, but also of supporting that mind. A brain of this sophistication must have been preceded by a simpler brain, which was equally good at organizing the body, but which would not support something like a mind. And I should just say at this point, if it's not immediately obvious, that I am saying that mind is something other than the kind of aggregate of maintenance and kind of homeostatic processes that the body goes through, which are undoubtedly very complex, and I think there is something to do with self in there, which I might get back to later. But how I'm talking about mind, it is something. It is a cognitive activity which is other than simply the maintenance procedures of the body. Oh, and also different from the engagements that the body makes with the environment. I think it's something other than that. Okay, now I realise this is a contested point, and that mind is a fluid concept which has many very diverse applications. Some may well say that mind can be meaningfully attributed to the simplest life forms, or to non-living systems, or even to inanimate matter. The philosopher David Chalmers flirts with this idea very eloquently, and of course it also features within some spiritual discourse. Some might say that mind is a constituent part of the fabric of the universe, and we are simply its local instantiations. I think there's a concept sometimes referred to as big mind, which kind of has that. This is not the position I am taking here. Although I will be qualifying this later, for the moment I am assuming that mind is the result of a bottom-up process involving something like emergence, adaptation, exaptation, or epiphenomenalism, or some other unnameable process, and begins with simpler entities. Furthermore, I will be arguing that whilst cognition is commonplace amongst living organisms, and possibly amongst entities not usually considered cognate, mind is a peculiarity of human condition. So I think I've kind of said that twice really, but I just wanted to reinforce for myself the distinction I'm making between cognition as a process emerging out of homeostatic maintenance procedures, sensory motor coordinating procedures, and some other procedures, and this thing we call mind, which I'm going to be arguing later on is a relatively recent invention.